Close your eyes for just a moment. Can you hear the distant melodic tinkling of a barrel piano drifting through the warm evening air? Can you smell the intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine mingling with the rich aroma of roasted coffee on hot sand? Welcome back to a time we all deeply miss. In this video, we are taking a journey back to the sun-drenched streets, the cozy courtyards, and the simpler times of 1960s Greece. We are going to rediscover 20 magical everyday details and forgotten rituals that defined our childhoods, but have slowly vanished from the modern world. From the daily visitors who walked our streets to the Sunday traditions that brought our families together, these are the moments that shaped who we are today. And make sure to stay with me until the very end, where we will remember the most touching figure of all. The man who managed to freeze our innocent youth onto a small piece of paper. A memory you surely still keep tucked away in a drawer. Before we explore these precious memories, let us remember how time itself felt different back then. The 1960s and 1970s were an era unhurried by the frantic pace of modern technology. Time moved gracefully, like a slow, peaceful river. We did not have glowing screens in our hands or instant messages demanding our immediate attention. Because we could not reach out instantly, we learned the profound value of waiting. We waited days for a letter. We waited all week for a Sunday stroll. And this patience made the reward infinitely sweeter. There is a modern myth that because we lacked these digital conveniences, our lives were somehow poorer or more isolated. The exact opposite is true. Our lives were astonishingly rich in human connection. We communicated face to face, sitting on stone stoops, sharing our joys and our sorrows without a filter. We knew the faces of the people who grew our food, delivered our mail, and shined our shoes. We belonged to our neighborhoods, and our neighborhoods belonged to us. We were wealthy in sincerity, rich in community, and bound together by shared rituals that turned everyday survival into a beautiful, collective poetry. Let us begin with the early morning arrival of the ice cellar. Before electric refrigerators hummed in every kitchen, the heavy wooden icebox was the true heart of the home. You would hear the heavy, rumbling wheels of his cart echoing down the cobblestone streets shortly after dawn. He carried massive crystalline blocks of ice, gripping them with heavy iron tongs. The ice seller would hoist the freezing block onto a thick burlap sack on his shoulder, his clothes forever damp from the melting frost. Do you remember the sound of his metal pick chipping away at the block to fit perfectly into your family refrigerator? For us children, this was a moment of pure magic. We would gather around his cart like eager sparrows, waiting for the tiny, shimmering shards of ice to fall to the ground. We would snatch them up, letting the freezing water melt on our tongues beneath the hot Mediterranean sun. It was a simple joy, a refreshing treat that cost absolutely nothing, yet it felt like a precious gift. The wooden icebox itself had a distinct smell, a comforting mixture of damp wood and the fresh produce stored inside. Emptying the drip tray beneath it was a daily chore, but it was a rhythm of life that taught us patience and a deep appreciation for the cold glass of water we enjoyed at dinner. And now, let us recall the unmistakable aroma of the Sunday roast at the local bakery. In those days, very few homes had ovens large enough to cook a grand family meal. Instead, the neighborhood bakery served as our communal kitchen. Early on Sunday morning, mothers and grandmothers would prepare large, round tin pans filled with lamb or chicken. They nestled the meat among potatoes dripping with olive oil, lemon juice, and generous pinches of wild mountain oregano. You would carefully carry this heavy pan down the street to the local baker. The bakery was a symphony of smells, radiating the intense, comforting heat of the massive wood-fired oven. Everyone in the neighborhood brought their pans, and the baker instinctively knew which family belonged to which meal. Walking home after the Sunday church service, the streets were filled with people retrieving their perfectly roasted dinners. The juices had caramelized, the potatoes were golden and crisp at the edges, and the meat was tender enough to fall off the bone. We would walk back home, carefully balancing the hot tin, while the savory aroma followed us like a fragrant cloud. It was a shared culinary ritual that turned a simple neighborhood into one large extended family dining together on a Sunday afternoon. Let us step into the magic of the summer nights at the open-air cinema. When the intense heat of the day finally surrendered to the cool evening breeze, the whole neighborhood would gather under the starry sky. You could hear the satisfying crunch of white gravel beneath your shoes as you walked to find your canvas folding chair. The air was always heavy with the sweet, intoxicating perfume of night-blooming jasmine and honeysuckle that climbed the whitewashed walls of the enclosure. Before the film even started, the distinct sound of the projector whirring to life would send a thrill of anticipation through the crowd. We did not have fancy popcorn. Instead, we bought paper cones filled with roasted pumpkin seeds from the friendly vendor at the entrance. The rhythmic cracking of the seeds, the soft whispers of neighbors, and the dramatic voices of beloved Greek actors echoing from the screen created a perfect symphony. When the reel had to be changed, the lights would softly illuminate the courtyard. It gave everyone a chance to stretch, fetch a cold glass of sour cherry juice, and enthusiastically discuss the plot. It was never just about watching a movie. It was about breathing the summer air together in a magical shared sanctuary of storytelling. Do you remember the bittersweet, twinkling melodies of the wandering barrel piano? The laterna player was a true symbol of urban Greek life in the 1960s. He would slowly push his heavy, ornate wooden instrument through the narrow streets of the city. The laterna was always a spectacular sight to behold. It was beautifully decorated with faded photographs of famous singers, artificial silk flowers, and intricate, colourful embroidered fabrics. When he stopped at a busy corner and began to turn the heavy iron crank, the air would instantly fill with popular romantic songs and lively waltzes. The music had a slightly metallic, charmingly out-of-tune quality that made it feel incredibly nostalgic, even back then. Women would step out onto their balconies, wiping their hands on their aprons, simply to listen and smile. They would wrap a few small coins in a piece of paper so they would not bounce away, and toss them down to the street below as a token of gratitude. The musician would expertly catch the paper, tip his worn hat, and move on to the next square. The fading sound of the laterna, as it disappeared around the corner, always left a lingering sense of sweet melancholy, a beautiful soundtrack to our youth that has now fallen completely silent. Think back to the misty hours of early dawn, long before the city had fully awakened. The very first sound you would hear was the rhythmic clatter of the neighborhood milkman. Whether he arrived with a patient mule, a horse-drawn cart, or a heavy creaking bicycle, his arrival signaled the true beginning of the day. He carried large, gleaming aluminium jugs, filled to the brim with raw, fresh milk from the nearby farms. The milkman would use special, long-handled metal cups to measure the exact amount your mother requested, pouring it directly into the family pot, left waiting on the doorstep. The sound of the metal cup striking the rim of the jug was our morning bell. The first and most important task of the morning was to boil this fresh milk on the stove to pasteurize it. The kitchen would quickly fill with a rich, sweet, and incredibly comforting aroma. As the milk cooled, a thick, delicious, creamy layer would form on the surface. For us children, a slice of fresh, crusty bread, sprinkled with sugar and dipped into this warm, rich cream, was the ultimate breakfast treat. We knew the man who nourished us, we knew his name, and we trusted him completely. It was a relationship built on daily reliability and a deep sense of community that modern supermarkets can never replicate. Let us take a short walk to the traditional neighborhood grocery store. Stepping inside this small shop was like entering an enchanting cave of culinary treasures. The air was a thick, fascinating blend of aromas. You could smell strong olive oil soap, salted cod resting in wooden crates, bunches of dried oregano hanging from the ceiling, and the sharp, briny scent of feta cheese aging in large wooden barrels. The grocer knew every single family by name. He wore a neat, spotless apron and always kept a sharp pencil tucked neatly behind his ear. When you asked for feta, he would fish a large white block from the brine, weigh it on his heavy brass scales, and expertly wrap it in thick, waxy paper. But the absolute most important item in the store was not for sale. It was the small, worn notebook he kept on the wooden counter. This notebook was the neighborhood ledger of trust. If a family was short on cash until payday, he simply wrote the amount down in his book. There were no credit cards and no background checks, just a handwritten promise and a firm, honest handshake. He would often slip a hard candy or a sweet dried fig into the hands of the children while the mothers finalized their lists. This small shop was the beating heart of the neighborhood, a place of gossip, unwavering support, and deep human connection. Can you visualize those long, lazy summer afternoons when the fierce heat finally began to break? This was the time for one of the most beautiful and forgotten social rituals of our past. Women would carry low wooden chairs with woven straw seats out onto the shaded sidewalks or into the cool, shared courtyards. They brought with them large wicker baskets overflowing with fresh, crisp green beans. Together, they would sit in a tight circle, their hands moving with incredible speed and grace, snapping the ends of the beans and pulling the tough strings. The rhythmic snapping sound provided a steady, comforting percussion to their lively conversations. This circle was where the true news of the neighborhood was broadcast. They generously shared recipes, quietly arranged marriages, passionately debated local politics, and laughed out loud at daily struggles. Children played happily at their feet, drawing with white chalk on the pavement or chasing stray cats. By the time the evening shadows grew long and the baskets were filled with cleaned vegetables ready for the pot, bonds of friendship had been immensely strengthened. This simple chore was never seen as a burden, but rather as a wonderful excuse to gather, to support one another, and to weave the strong social fabric that held our communities together. As the bright, hot summer eventually gave way to the crisp, chilly winds of autumn, a new and comforting figure emerged on the street corners. It was the traditional chestnut roaster. His welcome presence was announced by the thick, grey plumes of smoke rising from his black iron charcoal brazier. The smell of roasting chestnuts is perhaps the single most defining scent of a Greek winter. It is an earthy, sweet, and deeply smoky aroma that instantly warms the soul. You would approach his small stand, rubbing your cold hands together, and watch him expertly turn the dark, scored nuts over the glowing red coals. When they were perfectly blistered and tender, he would scoop them into a makeshift cone, beautifully fashioned from pages of an old newspaper. Holding that warm paper cone in your hands was exactly like holding a tiny, personal stove. The intense heat seeped into your freezing fingers as you walked down the darkened street. Peeling the charred, brittle outer shell revealed the golden, sweet treasure inside, often leaving your fingertips dusted with dark black soot. We did not mind the soot at all. We cherished the warmth, the rich flavor, and the friendly nod of the hard-working roaster who stood in the freezing cold all day just to provide us with this simple, inexpensive comfort. Let us remember the profound ritual of hospitality, perfectly encapsulated in a tiny glass dish. Whenever a guest crossed the threshold of a Greek home, they were immediately offered a traditional spoon sweet. This was a profound gesture of respect and a sincere wish for a sweet, long life. The matriarch of the family spent many days meticulously preparing these preserves. They used bright sour cherries, aromatic bitter oranges, unripe green figs, or even tiny baby eggplants. These were boiled slowly in heavy, fragrant sugar syrup until they became brilliant, translucent jewels. When visitors arrived, the good silver tray was proudly brought out. Upon it rested the small glass plates, each holding a single, perfect portion of the sweet, accompanied by tiny, ornate silver spoons. Beside the sweet, there was always a tall glass of ice-cold water and a freshly brewed cup of strong coffee. You were meant to take a small bite of the sweet, let the rich syrup thoroughly coat your tongue, and then take a sip of the cold water to cleanse the palate. It was an elegant, incredibly unhurried ceremony. The colourful jars lining the pantry shelves were a point of immense pride for the homemaker, a beautiful testament to her skill, her infinite patience, and her readiness to welcome anyone with open arms and a generous heart. We must journey into the traditional coffee house, a male domain filled with lively chatter and the sharp clatter of dice. The preparation of traditional Greek coffee in those days was a true art form that required immense patience and skill. The coffee was not made on a quick electric burner, but rather on a special tray completely filled with fine, scorching hot sand. The proprietor would take a long-handled brass pot, add the finely ground coffee, sugar and water, and nestle it deeply into the heated sand. The soft heat surrounded the pot evenly, allowing the coffee to brew at a painfully slow, deliberate pace. This slow extraction released a deep, intoxicating aroma that filled the entire room. The true mark of a master brewer was the thick, rich foam that rose to the top just before boiling. It was poured carefully into small white cups, perfectly preserving that precious foam. While waiting for their coffee, the old men would passionately debate the news, loudly slam their backgammon pieces against the wooden board, and rhythmically click their amber worry beads. The coffee house was never a place to grab a quick drink. It was a second home, a local parliament of peers, and a sacred sanctuary of slow living and deep conversation. Let us remember the innocence and the quiet excitement of the Sunday evening promenade. As the sun began to set on the weekend, the entire town would participate in a collective, unwritten ritual. Everyone would wash, meticulously comb their hair, and put on their absolute finest clothes, the garments strictly reserved for Sundays. The main square, or the broad avenue along the seafront, would fill with families walking at a leisurely, synchronized pace. Parents strolled proudly arm in arm, greeting their neighbors with polite nods and warm smiles. But for the young men and women, this promenade was a highly anticipated and thrilling event. It was the only acceptable time to see and be seen by the opposite sex. Groups of young girls would walk together in one direction, while groups of young men walked in the opposite direction. As they crossed paths, shy glances were exchanged, red blushes were hidden, and unspoken messages were beautifully transmitted through a simple smile or the deliberate dropping of a handkerchief. There was a profound beauty in this subtle, highly innocent courtship. It was a time when anticipation was incredibly sweet, when a single lingering glance could fuel your imagination for the entire week until the next Sunday arrived. Can you hear the distinct, raspy, comical voice of the shadow puppeteer cutting through the warm night air? The shadow puppet theatre was the ultimate entertainment for children and adults alike before television captured our collective attention. A large white sheet was stretched tight across a wooden frame, brilliantly illuminated from behind by a bright lamp. Behind this glowing screen stood the master puppeteer, a man of incredible talent who voiced a dozen different characters, sang the traditional folk songs, and manipulated the flat, jointed cardboard figures with long wooden sticks. The main character, with his long arm and bare feet, was the clever, hungry, and mischievous hero of the common people. The neighborhood children would sit cross-legged on the bare earth, their eyes wide with absolute wonder, completely captivated by the magical screen. The whole audience would erupt into genuine, roaring laughter at the physical slapstick comedy and the clever political satire cleverly hidden within the script. When the show finally ended, we would walk home under the bright stars, imitating the funny voices and joyfully reenacting the epic battles. It was a shared cultural imagination, a beautiful theatre made entirely of light, dark shadows, and pure storytelling magic. Let us look down at the pavement and remember the dignified figure of the wandering shoe shiner. He was a permanent and respected fixture on the bustling street corners, sitting patiently on his small, low wooden stool. Before him rested his most prized possession, a magnificent, heavy wooden box, decorated with intricate brass studs and shining metal plates. Inside were neat rows of round tin cans filled with coloured waxes, stiff bristle brushes, and soft velvet cloths. To attract a customer, he did not shout. Instead, he created a catchy rhythm by smartly tapping his heavy wooden brush against the side of his box. It was a crisp, percussive sound that echoed down the busy avenue. When a gentleman stopped and placed his dusty shoe on the brass footrest, the shiner went to work with the intense focus of an artist. The strong, chemical smell of the shoe wax would immediately waft into the air. He would brush, apply the polish, and buff the leather with a strip of cloth pulled taut between his hands, moving with lightning speed. In just a few minutes, the worn leather would shine like a dark mirror. It was a service that demanded respect, a brief moment of pause in a busy day, and a testament to the pride people took in their personal appearance. We must turn our minds to the quiet, intimate spaces of the home, where the future was being stitched entirely by hand. In those decades, the preparation of a young woman's dowry was a monumental, lifelong task. From the very time a girl was born, her mother and grandmothers would begin to fiercely embroider, knit, and crochet. They worked meticulously with fine white cotton and heavy linen, spending countless hours by the dim light of a lamp, creating intricate lace borders and beautiful floral patterns. These precious textiles were carefully folded and stored in heavy, carved wooden trunks. To protect them from moths and the passage of time, bars of green olive soap, fragrant camphor, or bundles of dried purple lavender were tucked safely between the layers. Whenever the heavy trunk was opened, that clean, herbal scent would fill the entire room, a smell that meant deep love, thorough preparation, and bright hope for the future. Every single pillowcase, every tablecloth, and every bedsheet carried the silent prayers and the meticulous labor of the women in the family. When a young couple finally married, the display of these crisp, white linens was a profound moment of pride. It was not just about household goods, it was about passing down a tangible legacy of devotion woven securely into every single thread. Let us wait at the front gate for the highly anticipated arrival of the postman. In an era when telephones were an incredibly rare luxury, this man in his neat uniform was our only true connection to the vast world beyond our borders. He was the most welcomed visitor in any neighborhood. Many families had seen their sons, brothers, and husbands leave the country in search of a better life, boarding massive ships for America, boarding long trains for Germany, or flying to the distant southeastern sphere. The postman brought the tangible proof that they were still alive and thinking of us. He would hand over those distinct, crinkly blue airmail envelopes covered in exotic stamps and foreign postmarks. The arrival of such a letter was a major family event. The recipient would often sit in the courtyard, carefully slicing the envelope open. If the mother could not read, a child or a kind neighbor would read the letter aloud. We would hear the poignant words of homesickness, the strange descriptions of snowy cities, and the solemn promises to return. Sometimes a crisp foreign banknote or a black and white photograph would fall gently from the folded paper. The postman carried our tears, our massive relief, and our deepest human connections safely in his heavy leather satchel. Do you recall the heavy, joyful, and utterly exhausting labour that signalled the true arrival of spring? As the bitter cold weather retreated, it was time to put away the heavy woolen carpets, specifically the thick, shaggy rugs that kept our bare floors warm during the winter. This was certainly not a task for a washing machine. It was a massive outdoor event that required physical strength, abundant water, and cheerful community cooperation. Women would drag these immense, heavy carpets out into the open courtyard, or sometimes load them onto carts to take them to a nearby flowing river or the central village fountain. They would flood the thick wool with freezing cold water and scrub it vigorously with large blocks of raw green olive soap. The unmistakable scent of that pure, alkaline soap, mixed with the earthy smell of wet wool, is completely unforgettable. To get the dirt out, they would walk barefoot over the soaking carpets, stomping rhythmically, often singing old, familiar folk songs to keep the pace. The soapy water would run down the cobblestones in little white rivers. Once thoroughly rinsed, the incredibly heavy, wet rugs were hauled over strong wooden fences to bake and dry in the fierce spring sun. The house would then feel incredibly light, airy, and fully prepared for the heat of the approaching summer. We must remember the magical days when our own imaginations painted the vivid pictures that screens now provide. Before television sets became the glowing centerpiece of absolutely every living room, the large wooden radio box held the place of honor. It was a beautiful, polished piece of furniture with glowing amber dials and a soft, fabric-covered speaker. On Sunday afternoons, the entire family, and sometimes even the neighbours, would gather closely around this magical box. The room would fall completely silent as we tuned in to the Sunday afternoon theatre broadcasts. We would listen intently to the dramatic voices, the startling sound effects of slamming doors, pouring rain, or galloping horses. In our minds, the scenery was far more vivid and spectacular than any television production could ever hope to be. Later in the afternoon, the tension would dramatically shift to the live broadcast of the football matches. The passionate, rapid-fire commentary of the sports announcer would make our hearts race wildly. Grown men would lean incredibly close to the speaker, shouting passionately at the radio, as if the referee could actually hear them. We were united by the invisible waves of sound, sharing the immense suspense, the tragedy, and the triumphs as a powerful collective experience. Let us listen once more for the absolute sweetest sound of a hot summer morning. Long before supermarkets sold giant tubs of complicated, artificial desserts, the arrival of the local ice cream cart was a moment of pure, unadulterated euphoria. The vendor would pedal his heavy white tricycle down the street, enthusiastically ringing a shiny brass bell that could be heard several blocks away. The cart was a marvel of simple, brilliant engineering, heavily insulated and filled with chunks of block ice and coarse rock salt to keep the precious cargo perfectly frozen. When we heard that magical bell, we would beg our parents for a few small coins and run outside entirely barefoot. The vendor would open the heavy metal lid and a thick cloud of white mist would escape into the hot air. He did not have dozens of flavors. You could choose vanilla, chocolate, or a simple mix of both. He would use a special metal scoop to serve the ice cream into a tiny, fragile wafer cone or a small paper cup with a flat wooden spoon. The taste was intensely pure, icy, and incredibly sweet. We would eat it as fast as we possibly could before the scorching sun melted it down our sticky fingers. That simple scoop of vanilla held far more joy and excitement than the most expensive, elaborate desserts we can buy today. Can you smell the sour, wonderfully earthy scent of late summer days spent preparing for the harsh winter ahead? This was the time for making traditional pasta completely by hand, a vital ritual of survival, thrift, and immense flavor. The women of the extended family would gather to make these tiny, rustic noodles. They would mix coarse crushed wheat with soured milk or fresh yogurt, kneading the heavy dough with incredibly strong hands in enormous wooden troughs. The real magic happened when the dough was passed carefully through large metal sieves to create tiny, pebble-like grains. They would spread brilliantly clean white sheets across the flat roofs of the houses or over large wooden tables in the sunlit courtyards. The grains were scattered very thinly across the cotton fabric to dry in the blazing August sun. For several days, the entire property smelled intensely of sour milk and toasted wheat. It was the children's important job to guard the drying pasta from hungry birds and curious stray cats. When it was bone dry, it was stored away in large, breathable cloth sacks. On freezing, dark winter nights, a steaming bowl of this thick soup, enriched with a piece of sharp feta cheese, was the ultimate comfort food. It was the literal taste of summer sunshine, preserved perfectly to warm us during the darkest days of the year. Finally, let us stroll into the public park and remember the man who beautifully froze our childhood in time. The itinerant photographer was a deeply familiar and beloved character of our youth. He certainly did not have a small camera that fitted into his pocket. He commanded a large, incredibly imposing wooden box camera, permanently mounted on a heavy, adjustable wooden tripod. When you walk through the park on a sunny Sunday, dressed flawlessly in your finest clothes, your parents would always stop to have a portrait taken. The photographer had wonderful, magical props for the children. A small, beautifully painted wooden horse, or a miniature wooden boat where you could sit and pretend to be a brave captain. He would position you perfectly, adjust the brass lens, and then drape a heavy black cloth entirely over his head to check the focus. He would hold up his hand, tell you to look at the little bird, and squeeze the rubber bulb. Weeks later, the postman would deliver that precious black and white photograph with its delicate scalloped edges. Today, we casually take thousands of digital photos that we never bother to look at again. But back then, that single, physical photograph was a true treasure. It was framed and kept forever. It captured not just our young faces, but the fleeting, beautiful innocence of an era we will never see again. As we look back at these forgotten fragments of the past, a much deeper truth reveals itself. We do not just miss the wooden iceboxes, the taste of the roasted chestnuts, or the sound of the barrel piano. What our hearts truly ache for is the way we felt in those magical days. We miss the boundless energy of our youth, the comforting, steady presence of our parents, and that beautiful, invisible thread that connected us all so deeply to one another. We miss an era when life was genuinely simpler, when true joy was found in a glass plate of sweet preserves, and when we had all the time in the world to sit and talk with a neighbour. These memories are the true treasures of our lives, forever safe from the passage of time. If this journey brought a tear to your eye or a warm smile to your face, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video so we can continue to preserve our beautiful shared history. And now I want to ask you a question. Which of these 20 memories touched your heart the most? Or what special detail from your own childhood in the 1960s do you miss every single day? Please share your personal stories in the comments below. Let us build a beautiful community of memories together.